Welcome to this week's episode of Food Bites. If there's one social issue that's dominated London in the last few years, it's been homelessness and the subject of homelessness and the pressures we're all feeling. We know that every city across the country is facing it as well. And, it's especially problematic in the winter as we try to find people places to stay in the cold weather. But also, it's really become something that's almost an epidemic across the country, and people are trying to find ways to handle it, and it has not been easy. London has had a number of interesting developments just in this last while, but I will say that for the course of about 2 years, it was the media that kept these stories front and center for us. A lot of us didn't know what was going on. We could see some signs of it. But really, all of a sudden, things began to start to break through. And we know about the Health&Homeless Summit and those kind of things. I give full credit for all of that. Before any of that happened and people assembled, I give full credit to the media and what they did at keeping it alive for 2 years. And especially this individual. This is Randy Richmond from the London Free Press. Now, Randy, we've known one another a long time. And also, you've been to Sudan with us all those years ago doing reporting from the Free Press on those stories. And I don't suppose back then, when you think about it, that we ever thought that we would see that kind of homeless situation in London, Ontario, that we were seeing in Sudan, right? People just kind of wandering, trying to find a way to live. So that was a bit of a shocker for me to see London and Canada moving down this route in this last while. But you have tracked it from the beginning, even of the pandemic, and worked your way through it. And you've now seen some significant changes lately, developments that are happening of trying to handle it. Can you just describe for me what that journey has been like for you? Have you felt more hope as you've moved on with it? You felt less hope? Or do you adopt, being the good contextual journalist that you are, a kind of wait-and-see attitude?
Well, I do generally adopt the wait-and-see attitude, but I've felt more hope the last year or so than I had for a long time. And largely because, we covered homelessness at the Free Press and other media here for decades. And as you mentioned, the last 4 or 5 years, things seem to be getting worse and worse. And the Free Press learned a couple of winters ago about large numbers of people living on the river in the East End and being told to go there by city officials, by outreach workers, even as the weather was getting worse. Those stories led to what we first called the winter response to homelessness, kind of a urgent, immediate, emergency response from the city to house people, and community groups, largely community groups, who got together, who did that a couple winters ago, and repeated that process last winter. And these efforts, although well-intentioned and worthwhile as they were, they didn't really solve the problems. And we started to see more and more deaths. And we started the Free Press. We have started to obtain the list that goes around every month of the number of people who died, and it was growing and growing. And then there was a hunger strike by some frontline workers, which also led to more attention. And, as we know, in the fall, last fall, city officials led by city manager Livingston and other leaders got together and started the summit process, which led to what they call the whole of community response to health and homelessness, which, we're going to talk about and which lots of people know about. And, the Free Press and I personally have critiqued the city and community leaders for over years for not getting together and working together. And in fact, we held before the pandemic, we held a series called Face It, and a public session where people were encouraged to work together. So now that people are working together, it's not. I'm reluctant to. Well, I wouldn't anyways. I will continue to be objective, but I'm reluctant to be quick with criticism, put it that way. I'm reluctant to jump on every little thing that goes wrong, if it does go wrong, because finally, finally, what we've been pushing for, people working together, is happening.
My belief is that you did more than that. I mean, the reporting and all that stuff was great, but the truth is, there was a time there where there was kind of a suppression of the story. Now, I know that because I was involved. The food bank was doing all of these homeless lunches to all these different groups, working with RBC Place and groups like 519 Pursuit and YOU and others. And you know, I would go out sometimes with my daughter, Abouk, and there would be deaths that were happening amongst the homeless population. And yet it was very hard to get any stories about that. And then the next thing you know, it was people were starting to talk to one another with institutions, the workplace, whatever, that, you know, is anybody dying for this? Because I've heard that there is. And I know, Randy, I'm not trying to get into the details, and you don't need to either, but there was a time there, I think, whereas if the media had have let up, you especially, had let up and just let that go, I'm not sure we would have developed the urgency that we did a short while later. I think you uncovered some of that stuff about the number of homeless deaths. And I remember you did a couple of stories on it, and everybody kind of went, whoa. We realized the consequences of this. It wasn't just trying to house people, but there were fatal consequences of a lack of action or whatever. For you in that moment, I'm wondering, as a journalist, how you felt in that moment. You know, when you were going to do it, were you worried a bit about it, or did you feel it might, you know, hurt the story a bit, or where were you at that time?
Well, I have to say that I was helped, especially on those death stories, by former City Hall reporter Megan Stacey. So she and I worked closely together on these stories. And I would say what was fueling us was anger. We were angry that the information was being kept from us. We were angry at the numbers we were hearing. We were angry at the lack of outrage from Londoners, because they didn't know, to be fair to Londoners. So that really fueled us. We were astounded by the numbers we were hearing, and numbers that had been collected for years, but not published. So we pushed and pushed to get those numbers, and we got them. We got them through backdoor sources at first. Eventually, and over time, the homeless community has agreed to release them. It's still not necessarily easy to get those numbers. They don't publish them. But I think you're right. Those sheer numbers fueled a lot of the outrage. You know, we've written about people dying. I've been writing about individuals dying on the streets for years. But you do one story, and 8 months or a year and a half later, you do another story, and it doesn't show the impact. But the numbers alone, I think that really, really alarmed people.
Yeah. I remember at the time saying to Jane that, you know, when we went to Sudan, we've been there for 25 years working away at things, but one of the ways that you tell the story of how urgent it is you come back and you talk about famines, war, violence, conflict, starvation, but it's numbers that you tell people so that they realize in a country of 8 million people, this many people are homeless, you know, wandering. Climate change is changing everything over there. They've been taken prisoners, all of those things. And we came back, and in order to tell that story, numbers were essential for that to happen. Once people heard the numbers, they realized that this is a significant matter. I think in the homeless situation, it was just hearing the numbers. It didn't so much matter if it was 100 or 1,000 or 2,000. It was deaths were happening in our midst. And for a lot of Londoners, I think they were having to come to terms with that. And so were associations and organizations and others. But I did find that ironic how we know that the numbers are important to tell a worldwide story, but in our own community, we were not able to get those numbers. And as a result, I think the public response was maybe a little bit latent, hanging back, not quite sure what to do, attributing some of it to the pandemic. But once they saw the mortality of it, I think that's when they began to see it in comments that people were making to the media or people showing up at meetings demanding something be done about it. I think that for me, that moment really was pivotal to help aligning the rest of us to finally doing something about it.
And I think those numbers too shook and broke down that barrier between social service agencies and City Hall, because there was, as you know, conflict between those two sectors. City Hall oversaw a lot of the money that went to community groups, so they were reluctant to speak publicly against City Hall. But there was a feeling that we reported on that the city wasn't listening. And I think that the deaths and the public alarm helped those two sectors, the City Hall sector and the organizational sector, kind of come together and realize that the only solution was if they put aside some of their preconceptions and past grievances and work together.
And they did. I mean, that's the beauty of that story. Now, I think there were two pivotal moments for me about it. We were delivering food, like we spent $1 million in the first year of COVID, delivering food to the homeless. It was almost that again in the second year. So I was very much aware from talking with agencies and seeing homeless folks of the seriousness of it. I do think that the mortality of it through the reporting that was done was so essential. I think the second piece, though, was the $25 million anonymous donation. It seemed to me that when that was suddenly put on the table, that all of a sudden the city realized it had something to work with, right? It was appealing to the province. It was appealing to the feds for help with the homeless problem, just like every city was. But suddenly this anonymous donation came forward from a very generous family. And I think it suddenly, like a magnet, it began drawing all of these other higher aspirations. Could we do something around it with that base of money? Is that your sense that that's what happened? I didn't talk to you about that before, but.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I mean, if without that donation, I don't think we'd be even talking today, or we might be talking about a failed experiment or a nice idea that didn't happen. But it was quite a coup, and it's the key to moving forward. It's an amazing donation, $25 million. It'll go up to $35 million if Londoners raise $5 on their own. The donor will match. And it definitely fueled a sense of hope. And it was announced at the Mayor Josh Morgan's State of the Address in the winter. And it really startled people. It surprised people, and a good surprise. And you're right. It's not just the $25 million, as great as that is. It allowed representatives from the city to go to the federal and provincial governments and say, we've got this money. We're going to get more. We're putting our money into it. What about you? And we've seen a $74 million $74 million coming to the city from the federal government now for housing, which can be used for some of these homelessness initiatives. The province still hasn't said anything yet, but I know that there's lobbying going on. And it not only was it $25 million, but the donor couple, they're well-established. He's a well-established business leader. So I think people look at that and think, well, if this person and his wife have faith in it and they're willing to put a lot of money into it, then maybe there's something real here. Maybe it's worth looking at. Yeah.
A couple of stories there, what you just said there about the wealthy individual. There's also a fundraising team that's been assembled this week, as you know, and the chair of it is the head of Canada Life. And I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they were saying, well, what would people like that know about the difficulties of what, people that are homeless are going through, or people that are in low-income situations? And that individual's wife is a regular volunteer at the food bank. Right? So she goes home and she delivers these messages about what they're finding at these different things. And I think, they've got this, Wayne Dunn, for instance, is also on that committee. Wayne Dunn raises over $1 million worth of food for the food bank every year by assembling almost 700 businesses. Right? So you're not just throwing it up to some upper sector of millionaires or whatever it is and saying, come on, guys, throw a little bit out to the poor. These folks are already involved in these different things, but the difference this time is that they're all working together on it. And the other thing I wanted to say, we just had the federal Liberals here. Well, these are my old folks that I used to work with. So I was in seeing them. They were staying at the Armories Hotel. And And I talked to some of them, and they remember sometimes cities will come to Ottawa and say, we need investment, we need money, and it might be the mayor and a couple of other people. Other cities are coming up with busloads of people trying to lobby the federal government for funds to make it happen. But when they looked at London and saw that London had cooperated and collaborated in a sense that it got the $25 million, and look what it did with it. It established this series of policies and initiatives and other things that were really serious. So when Justin Trudeau was in town, it was here that he made that announcement, right? That the federal government was going to get back into housing. 3 weeks before, he wasn't going to do that. So I do think that 25 million, what Lynn Livingston did with the others, which was the city manager, which was awesome, I really think it proved to the feds, and it was just lucky they were here, but it proved to the feds that London means it. We were capable of pulling in this type of thing, and it wasn't just money and all that kind of stuff. We'd had 2 or 3 years of speaking with people of lived experience, largely thanks to you, but also the city and dealing with it. So it was this weird confluence of events, I think, that suddenly made it happen. And then at the end of the caucus, the Prime Minister announced that the member for London North Centre, Peter Fragaskatos, was going to be the Parliamentary Secretary for Housing. Right, and that's important. That's a voice, that's a lens through which the federal government will hear about what's going on in London. But I find it fascinating that it takes those kind of events and the reporting on the mortality, as we were talking about earlier, that finally gets things to happen.
Well, yeah, I agree. And to go back to your first point a bit about the cabinet or the committee, yeah, those are big names. And we talk about the co-chair, Jeff McCown of Canada Life. And as he pointed out, he runs a business that has 4,000 employees downtown. Yeah. And he makes a point that, not only is it vital, and the most important part is helping people live, but downtown, if we want this city to attract businesses and employees and keep employees, downtown has to be healthier for everybody. Yeah. And with 4,000 people downtown, he wants to make sure that happens. And you mentioned, of course, the Liberal initiative and the government giving London money. And, I've talked in the past about how it's far easier for governments to give entire municipalities or coordinated groups or networks money. In the past, London has had a reputation of every group fighting individually, every organization individually fighting for its piece of the pie. And, that's probably hurt London. And this time, I think London has outdone everybody else coming forward, as you say, with busloads of people saying, not only do we need your help, we've got $25 million plus, and now we've got a bunch of very successful people from different sectors on the fundraising committee, and on and on and on, and now we've got a parliamentary secretary. So it's true, all these events seem to be coming together, and they offer some hope. There will be speed bumps along the way for sure, especially when it comes to where the homeless hubs are located and things like that. But right now it's kind of a time to celebrate that at least there's some momentum, right? Yeah, I really agree with that. I also think it's very important for us to parse this well. I feel that the Health and Homeless initiative is really designed for the homeless folks that have the highest rate of challenges, right? Hospitals have often had to deal with those people in the past. That's why hospitals were part of the Health and Homeless Summits, right? It's very, very important. So they're going to try to do 5 hubs by the end of the year, if they can get to that. You're still dealing with 100, maybe 125 people. Now, the rest of the people in London, what happens there? Right. And I think that's the next phase we all have to talk about. The food bank has approached the city and said, we really agree with that. That's a smart approach. So we will work with you to help those individuals as they move forward. But the ones that are the closest to disaster, it's right that we come together and provide a professional kind of care. Hospital people, doctors, security, dietitians, medication specialists, all of those things. That's what they're going to get. But it's true that homelessness is not this homogeneous group that's just moving around en masse, right? There are all these distinctions within it. And what the city did and what the donor did is they said, look, we're going to go for the hardest one.
And I think that really says something about the city and the donor and others. They could have just thrown the money out there, set up a whole bunch of different things to try to help people. But they went to the people that were the most in need. And I find that aspect of it interesting. Did that surprise you that they did that?
It kind of did, to be honest, because it's the first time that there's been this much effort for those people, the ones struggling the most. There's been groups and organizations and nonprofits that have focused on people with the highest acuity, the highest needs, for sure. But this kind of concerted effort, I wasn't really expecting that necessarily, because it is easier to give money to other initiatives that will help homelessness and housing, but not the people who need it the most. I think that there's a recognition now that it's only humane that we help those hardest to serve, and also it makes our city safer to help those hardest to serve. And if you want to be strictly materialistic about it, or whatever the word is, it saves the most money in emergency care and hospital care and police and ambulance interactions, and over, it saves the most money if we help the hardest to serve first. And I think as well, there's a recognition that, it's kind of a cork or a plug in the system, that if we can help the hardest people to serve find housing and put a lot of effort into it, then that will ease, that's going to eventually ease demand for shelter space. And, the other part of this is affordable housing, which the city is attempting to do what it can. As you and I know, that's a matter that's going to require a lot more federal and provincial dollars.
Yeah, that's right.
But, I think that's why. And, I'm pleased that I think people should be pleased that they're going after those who needed the most first, for all those reasons I just said.
Yeah. I my sense of it is that these people often were in hospitals and in emergency departments and so on and so forth. They were in a pretty tough way. And so hospitals had to care for those people, which meant that they couldn't do the regular thing that they were supposed to be doing. So I think there's that aspect of it as well. It's opening up the system for what it's really designed for, and allowing the homeless hubs to give the specialized treatment for what those people need. I partly get frustrated with this story, though, Randy, to be honest, because homelessness didn't happen because of London policy, right? I've talked to many mayors. This is happening across the country. We were surprised by it. Every city was. But it's also true that there's no way that it will get solved until the province and the feds weigh in. And I had a politician tell me in an interview that I did last week, he said, look at Glen, the feds have all the money, the province has all the power, and cities have all the problems. And it's so true. And, when Confederation was first started, 1867, 85% of the country lived on farms. As of last year, 85% of the country lives in communities and cities. It's swapped that way, but the power arrangements of federalism have hardly changed at all. So cities are still the poor cousins. They're having to get on buses and go to the capitals of senior jurisdictions and beg for money to try to help these things. And I think a lot of the reason why that is happening is because the power structure of Canada is wrong. It's the biggest migration in Canadian history has been that 85% from the rural side now over to the civic side. That's where all the potential is, the problems are, right? The creativity is. And until we get that answered and until we deal with that, every city in the country is going to continue to deal with this stuff.
And that's true. And, if this effort in London fails, it won't be because of London. It'll be because other levels of government have not helped. And as you say, that there's an imbalance of power and an imbalance of responsibilities. And we've all heard the word downloading on municipalities for a decade or so now. And this is a result. And, it's interesting that cities are now making more noise, though, about it. London has never been known to be a noise maker, but it's making a lot of noise now about the problem and that the help must come.
Yeah. I still say, though, that noise would not have been made if you didn't make your noise to begin with. That's really true. Agencies they weren't so much speaking out either. They were just trying to adjust. There was COVID. Some had to go to hotels. Others had to shut down services. Like, it was just so hard, Randy. And, everybody's trying to cope and wondering what's going on. But, you and other folks in the media started slicing through that stuff, and you started saying, well, why is this happening? Well, is there not a better way that we could respond to this, right? And you did that. And I remember saying to you a year and a half ago, that I really felt that your reporting cut through all the crap. All the stuff that everybody was throwing out there, and your reaction to that was, "Oh, pshaw," that was just the way you were. But I was right there. I was on the front lines along with so many other terrific Londoners who were doing more than I was. But it was this reporting that actually gelled it, that made it work. So there wouldn't have been noise without that noise, and that was traditional media really, really doing that. And now we're seeing traditional media slowly shutting the door. The lights are going out in communities. Everybody's blogging and doing all that other stuff, but it's really this kind of research that you did and that others did, Megan Stacey did, right? That we really need that stuff. And just at the time we need it to understand our problems and do something about them, lights are going out. Do you feel that?
I do, and I appreciate your comments. And of course, there are other media in London that have worked hard on this story too. Yeah. And give credit to the people. And there were only a few at the time who spoke out, frontline workers and some leaders. So, without them, we would have been not had much of a story to write. But it is true, and I worry about democracy. I worry about all these the latest round of cuts for all these weeklies in smaller places, are all closing their print editions, and they're cutting staff. And I know that there's staff cuts at other larger papers, not in London. At the moment, there's some staff cuts going on. And, it takes investment to do stories, to look at homelessness with a critical eye. And it's so much easier just to do stories that get clicks, the police and crime stories, valuable as they are. They're not the sole reason for journalism. So yeah, it is disturbing to me. My hope is that when I talk to young journalists and journalism students, there are many who are committed to these kinds of social issues. So that's the good news. But yeah, it's true. The light's being shed, and just as the lights are going out in newsrooms, and it's there'll be lots of people who will say, who cares? But if you're relying on social media and bloggers with biases to give your point of view, then these kinds of stories are not going to come out.
I think it's very important for everybody. You just 2 or 3 years ago, you won the award for Best Journalist of the Year in Canada, right? So if you could applied yourself to sailing or anything else, your skills, but you applied it to a social problem that was a nut that was not being cracked open and dealt with. But I remember times trying to reach you, and I couldn't because you're busy researching and studying it and trying to do it. That's the level of competence that's required for us to do to have the proper information to know how to move forward. I think it's remarkable what you have done. I know there's people like Kate Dubinsky over at CBC. There's so many others that, but it's also true that whenever we call press conferences now, an agency or whatever it is, hardly anybody comes anymore because the media groups don't have anybody. And for us as a community, if you want to tackle homelessness and you want to do it online, it's not going to happen, right? We really are going to need people who can dig down and report and bring those things out to us as you have done. So I really see you as the person, Randy, along with your compatriots and other organizations who pulled the tarp off and helped us to see what it really was. And from that generated a call from people to say you have to do something, and from that call came a very generous family who said, here's $25 million, let's make something happen. But it all started with the media. I think that's a remarkable thing. So thank you for that, Randy. I know what you're going to do right now. You go, oh no, but I really appreciate it, and I think this community really owes you a lot for what you've done.
Well, thanks. I'll keep that in mind next time I look at the comments on my stories.
No, that's the way it is. Thanks for doing this, Randy. We might talk to you again as Health and Homeless moves on to see what you're seeing or what you're